Hello there, and welcome once again to Friday Focus, where we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Well, it's nearly Christmas, isn't it? Everybody's busy, running around, last-minute shopping, looking forward to family get-togethers, and of course, I have a Merry Christmas Friday Focus for you. This week, Friday Focus is looking at what I entitle Merry Christmas from Your Kinsman Redeemer. We all love to receive Christmas cards. Why? Because they connect us with people who are important to us. Family, friends, acquaintances. We enjoy the greetings and well wishes of those with whom we have a relationship, no matter how slight, especially kinfolk. I'll bet you haven't heard that word since you watched the Beverly Hillbillies. A similar word, however, is kinsman. It's a little strange to our ears. We rarely use it. It's one of those old King James words. According to the dictionary, it means a relative from the same family, especially a male related by blood. You can read about a kinsman in the book of Ruth. However, the concept of a kinsman redeemer actually comes out a lot earlier, out of the book of Leviticus. In Leviticus 25:25, it says, "If one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold." A kinsman redeemer was a close male relative who redeemed what was lost, such as a relative's property, their freedom, or even their name. It includes marrying a dead brother's childless wife and raising a son to continue his family line. The kinsman might also act as an executioner, exacting revenge on someone who may have killed their relative. In the story of Ruth, Boaz was the kinsman redeemer who stepped in to marry Ruth. He protected and provided a home and family for her. Now, there were some requirements to be a kinsman redeemer. In fact, there were 4 of them. Number 1, you had to be related. The only way you could be a kinsman redeemer was to be related by blood. It started with the closest male relative and moved on from there if the closest could not or would not fulfill his obligation. Number 2, willingness was mandatory. In the story of Ruth, the man who was the closest relative, the kinsman redeemer, was unwilling to assume his obligation. So it fell to Boaz, who was the next closest relative, and he was willing. The unwilling party then would face some personal cost, and I should say that being willing is at the heart of what a kinsman redeemer is. Boaz stepped in and was willing to do it. The third requirement is you had to have the means to redeem. Willingness alone was not enough to be a kinsman redeemer. It was necessary to be able to follow through with whatever the requirements of the redemption were. A relative who did not have the means to make the redemption could not be the redeemer no matter how good their intentions were. And finally, the 4th requirement, you had to pay everything in full. There was no such thing as a partial redemption. The kinsman redeemer paid it all. Without payment in full, there was no redemption. It was an all or nothing proposition. Did you know that Jesus is our kinsman redeemer? We can easily recognize the parallels between Ruth's plight and ours. We, like her, are desperate and destitute, without hope. Every human on the planet was lost and alienated from God due to our sinful condition. We needed someone who would become our kinsman redeemer. What was impossible for us, however, was possible for God. He entered our world in the person of Jesus to redeem us. Number one, do you remember it had to be a relative? Well, Jesus became our relative. Because the Redeemer had to be part of the family, God miraculously fertilized Mary's egg, producing a human body, becoming part of the human family. However, no sin was passed down to Jesus, since all sin was passed on to humanity through the one man Adam, Romans 5:12. It would require a sinless male relative to bring about our redemption. And so God came in human flesh, Jesus. John spells it out very clearly in the first chapter of John. He says, in the beginning the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. John 1, verses 1 through 3. Then you drop down in the chapter a little further to verse 14, and we read, so the Word became human and made his home among us. Jesus testified to his pre-existence, saying to the Jews in John 8, verse 58, they were getting after him, and because he said Abraham rejoiced to see his day and was glad, and the Jews said, hold it, you're not even 50 years old yet. How can you say you saw Abraham? And then the answer Jesus gave them absolutely made them angry. Jesus answered in John 8:58, he said, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was even born, I am. That's the same name that God gave himself to Moses, Yahweh. I am that I am. So Jesus was fully God, and he became fully human to be our kinsman redeemer. Well, do you remember the second point? The Redeemer had to be willing to do it. And of course, Jesus was very willing to do it. Philippians emphasizes that willingness of Jesus. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. And then, of course, in John chapter 10, verse 18, Jesus himself said he laid down his life voluntarily. He says, no one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily. For I have the authority to lay it down when I want to, and also to take it up again. For this is what my Father has commanded. John 10:18. Christ freely gave up his life, taking upon himself sin's penalty. He paid the full price, not part price, the full price. Death and separation from God. That's what was commanded and needed. And then the third requirement, the kinsman redeemer had to be able to redeem. He couldn't just pretend. Jesus was able to redeem us. The kinsman redeemer must possess the ability to redeem, and thankfully Christ's obedience and death fulfilled the requirement. It was the death of the righteous for the unrighteous. If we were to take a look at what Scripture says in Romans chapter 5, verses 18 through 19, we read, yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God, a new life for everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous. And then the fourth requirement of the kinsman redeemer was everything had to be paid in full. There was no partial payment. And of course, number 4, Jesus paid sin's penalty in full. Sin demanded the ultimate. Romans chapter 6, verse 23 tells us that. For the wages of sin is death. The beautiful thing about our redemption is that it's complete. Nothing is lacking. If we read Hebrews chapter 10, verse 14, we'll find that it says, "For by that one offering he," that is Jesus, "forever made perfect those who are being made holy." That's where you are today. That's what Jesus did for us when he came to this earth and born in a manger. He came with the intent to die. And those who accept Christ are credited to have died and risen with him. It's a Merry Christmas indeed. This is Dr. Vic Hollyfriend in his grace. If you have any comments or questions, you can address them to me at vicsfridayfocus@gmail.com. That's vicsfridayfocus@gmail.com. God bless you and have a very Merry Christmas.